Midnight shift. The first time I met Ravi Desai, I was coordinating the evacuation of 340 people from a subway tunnel that had partially collapsed at 0247 hours on a Tuesday morning when the city was supposed to be sleeping, and he was the only paramedic within 5 miles who answered his phone to say, "I'm coming, tell me what I'm working with." My name is Hassan Ahmed. I'm 32, a transit authority dispatcher for SEPTA, Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, which is a fancy way of saying I sit in an operations center and coordinate the movement of thousands of people through tunnels under Philadelphia every single day. I'm supposed to know every inch of every tunnel, every emergency protocol, every worst-case scenario. I'm supposed to be ready for catastrophe because catastrophe is literally built into the job. What I wasn't prepared for was catastrophe at 0247 in the morning, combined with the voice of someone who sounded like absolute competence and absolute humanity in equal measure. 0247 hours, Market-Frankford Line, tunnel collapse near 13th Street Station, I reported, my voice steady because training makes you sound calm even when the world is breaking. Partial structural failure, approximately 340 passengers in tunnel, approximately 80 in the immediate collapse zone. We have 3 SEPTA emergency responders on scene, basic first aid setup, but we need medical coordination and we need it now. Ravi Desai, Afghan Medical Unit, currently en route, the voice said. ETA 4 minutes. I'm bringing 2 paramedics and a mobile trauma unit. What's your name? Hassan Ahmed, Transit Authority Dispatch. I'm coordinating from the operations center. Hassan. He said my name like he was filing it somewhere important. I need you to do something for me. I need you to stay on this line. I need you to be my eyes and ears in that tunnel, because I can't be there yet, but you can. Can you do that? Yes, I said. No hesitation. Because the thing about emergency response is that it creates this instant hierarchy of trust. You trust the person who sounds like they know what they're doing, who sounds like they care about the outcome, who sounds like they're going to save people. Ravi Desai sounded like all 3 things. The next 4 hours were the most intense coordination of my professional life. Ravi arrived at 0251 with 2 paramedics, a mobile trauma unit, and the kind of field authority that made people listen. He was tall, maybe 29, with dark brown eyes that processed information at the speed of thought, black hair already sweat-dampened from rushing, and hands that moved with surgical precision as he assessed the collapse zone. Hassan, talk me through the structural layout, he commanded, and I realized he was asking me, the dispatcher in the Safe Operations Center, to be his consulting structural expert. The tunnel was built in 1928, I said, pulling up the blueprints. Standard iron framework, reinforced concrete. The collapse is localized to the northern wall, approximately 40 feet of compromise. The load-bearing columns immediately adjacent appear intact, but there's possibility of further collapse if we apply pressure to the wrong areas. Send those blueprints to my phone, Ravi said. I'm looking at the collapse zone now, and I need to know if we have another 100 feet of safe passage before the next structural weakness. You have approximately 120 feet before the 15th Street Station junction, but the blueprints show a secondary support structure that might be compromised. Don't trust the old documentation. It was updated in 1987, but there were unofficial modifications in 1998. Ravi stopped moving for just a moment. You know this tunnel. I've been a dispatcher for 8 years, I said. I've studied every inch of every tunnel on my line. I've memorized the blueprints because people's lives depend on me knowing where the safe passage is. Then you're going to help me save them, Ravi said. Because I can treat the injured, but I can't evacuate 340 people through a tunnel that might collapse on them. You can. You know the safest route better than anyone on scene. What he was asking was insane. It meant leaving my post. It meant going into a tunnel that had already partially collapsed. It meant being physically present in the disaster instead of safe in the operations center. I'm coming, I said. Hassan, you said I could help save them. I'm coming. I made it to the 13th Street Station access point at 0304 hours. By that time, Ravi had already triaged 17 people, set up a secondary medical station, and somehow convinced everyone in the tunnel that he was the only person they could trust. Hassan, he called when he saw me descending. Thank God. I need you at the evacuation checkpoint. I need you to direct people through the safest route while I coordinate the medical assessments. What unfolded over the next 3 hours was a dance of precision and panic. People emerging from the darkness of the tunnel, some injured, most terrified. Ravi evaluating each person, checking for crush injuries, assessing neurological responses, determining who could walk unassisted and who needed transport assistance. Me directing the flow, using my knowledge of tunnel architecture to guide people through the safest passages, avoiding unstable sections, keeping the evacuation moving at a pace that didn't trigger further structural compromise. Around 0430, we hit a problem. There was a woman in her 60s, partially trapped under collapsed concrete, Too injured to walk but not injured badly enough to warrant priority trauma transport given the limited resources. She was conscious but in pain, and she was blocking the main evacuation route. We need to move her, Ravi said, kneeling beside her, but if we move her incorrectly, we risk spinal injury. The secondary tunnel, I said immediately. There's a maintenance passage about 30 feet north. It's narrower, but if we can get her there without moving her spine, show me, Ravi commanded. I led him to the maintenance passage, a narrow concrete corridor that predated the main tunnel by decades. Ravi carefully extracted the woman from under the concrete, working with another paramedic to keep her spine aligned, moving with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who understands human anatomy at a cellular level. It took 40 minutes. Every minute felt like the tunnel was holding its breath, waiting to collapse further. Every minute I was thinking about the weight of concrete above us, about the 1928 construction standards, about how much force it would take for the secondary support structure to give way. When we finally got her to the surface and into the mobile trauma unit, Ravi turned to me and said, "You just saved her life. If we'd tried the main tunnel, the movement would have stressed her spine beyond recovery. But that maintenance passage, you knew it would work." "I study the tunnels," I said. "It's my job to know." "It's not your job to crawl through them during structural collapses," Ravi said, and there was something in his eyes that wasn't just professional appreciation, "but I'm grateful that you did." By 0645 hours, we'd evacuated all 340 people. 80 had injuries requiring transport. 17 had serious injuries requiring immediate hospitalization. 2 had critical injuries that Ravi had managed with the kind of field medicine that definitely saved their lives. We were both sitting on a bench outside the 13th Street station, covered in concrete dust and tunnel water, and the specific exhaustion that comes from 4 hours of controlled crisis management. "Your team did incredible work," Ravi said. "Your medical coordination was incredible work," I replied. "I've never seen someone assess and triage that many people with that level of precision while working in a partially collapsed tunnel." "I trained in Kabul," he said, not explaining further, just stating a fact that explained everything. That his experience with crisis wasn't theoretical, that he'd learned emergency medicine in a context where resources were scarce and decisions happened at speed with life or death consequences. "You're Afghan," I said, "Afghan-American. My family came when I was 12. My father was a doctor, but the credentials didn't transfer, so he became a nurse. My mother was a teacher, became a translator. They did what they had to do to survive." He paused. "I became a paramedic because I wanted to honor what they taught me, how to help when everything's falling apart. I'm Pakistani-American," I said. "My parents were both engineers. Very practical people. They raised me to be practical too, to study systems, to understand infrastructure, to know that if you understand how things work you can prevent disasters. But you can't prevent all disasters," Ravi said quietly. "No, you can't, but when they happen you can help people survive them." I looked at him, "Like you did today." He turned to face me directly, and in the pre-dawn light with the city still mostly asleep around us, I saw something shift in his expression. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Are you seeing anyone?" "No," I said. "Are you?" "No, but I'm thinking I'd like to be, with you." He paused. "Is that insane? We just spent 4 hours in a tunnel together during a disaster, and now emergency response creates connection. We worked together. We trusted each other. That's not nothing. I want to take you to dinner," Ravi said. "When we're not both running on adrenaline and concrete dust, when we're actually human again. Can I do that?" "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." He was still covered in tunnel water. I was still covered in concrete dust. We were both probably concussed from adrenaline crash, but he reached over and took my hand, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The next week was administrative chaos. SEPTA launched a structural investigation. The city launched a safety review. Engineering reports were filed. Timeline analyses were conducted, and the tunnel that had nearly killed 340 people was suddenly very much in the news. Ravi and I navigated all of this with text messages between shifts. "How's the structural report?" "Devastating. Half the tunnel is at risk." "How's the hospital?" "Everyone's going to recover. Pending follow-up care, but no permanent injuries." "So we saved everyone," he texted one afternoon. "We saved everyone," I confirmed. "Dinner tonight," he sent. "I'm off at 1900. There's a Pakistani place near my apartment. My roommate recommended it. Is that too on the nose?" "It's perfect," I texted back. The restaurant was small and authentic, and run by a woman who immediately recognized Ravi as the paramedic who'd treated her nephew 2 years ago. She installed us at the best table, brought us complimentary appetizers, and essentially adopted us as honorary family members. "She does that," Ravi said apologetically. "Don't apologize. This is amazing. I tried the samosa. Also delicious. She definitely should adopt us." Over dinner he told me about his work. about Afghanistan and the first aid he'd learned in a context where you didn't have the luxury of calling for backup, about becoming a paramedic in the United States and discovering that emergency medicine in a developed country was both easier and harder. Easier because you had resources, harder because people expected perfection in the context of unlimited resources. The tunnel collapse terrified me, he admitted, because I was trained for chaos, but I was trained in a context where chaos was expected. Here, people trust the infrastructure. When the infrastructure fails, they panic. And I had to be calm enough for 340 panicked people while internally processing that the system I was trained to support had fundamentally failed. But you didn't let that paralyze you, I said. You moved forward. You saved people. Because you were there, he said. Because I had someone in my ear telling me the safe passages. Someone who understood the system deeply enough to know how to work around the failure. He set down his fork. You made me better that day, Hassan. You made me capable of more because you were there. I reached across the table and took his hand. You would have done it alone. You're that good. Maybe, but I didn't have to, and that changed everything. We dated for 3 months in the space between our shifts, dates that often happened at weird hours, that sometimes got cut short because of emergency calls, that were built on the foundation of having trusted each other in crisis. He met my family, told my very Pakistani parents that he was Afghan, which launched approximately 2 hours of discussion about regional differences that somehow ended with his mother getting invited to a family dinner. I met his roommate, who was aggressively pleased that Ravi had finally gotten a boyfriend, and who embarked on a campaign to make us a couple in every way that matters. 3 months in, Ravi got called to the transit authority for an official commendation. 3 months in, I did too. We stood in a room with city officials and press, and they talked about our coordination, about how communication between dispatch and field response had been the critical factor in saving 340 lives. Hassan Ahmed, the official said, your knowledge of tunnel infrastructure and your willingness to enter a dangerous situation to guide evacuation saved lives. Ravi Desai, they said, your medical coordination and field medicine expertise under pressure saved lives. After the ceremony, Ravi pulled me aside. I have something to ask you, he said. Okay, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 3 months. But I also know that in those 3 months, I've trusted you with my life, and you've trusted me with yours. That's not something people do lightly, and I don't want to waste time pretending it's anything less than profound. He pulled out a small velvet box. Are you seeing anyone? He asked, echoing the question he'd asked in the pre-dawn light after evacuating a tunnel. No, I said. Are you? I'm hoping to change that, he said. Hassan Ahmed, will you marry me? The ring was white gold with a small emergency medical symbol engraved on the inside. Practical, beautiful, exactly right. Yes, I said. Obviously yes. Epilogue, 1 year later. We got married in a small ceremony that brought together his Afghan-American family, my Pakistani-American family, and approximately 24 SEPTA colleagues and paramedics who apparently wanted to celebrate the couple that met during a tunnel collapse. This is the most dramatic origin story, Ravi's cousin said during the reception. I've known Hassan for 1 year and I'm still not over it. I've known you for 1 year too, I said. Afghan adoption through Ravi doesn't count as knowing me before the tunnel. The tunnel became famous, not in a good way. It became a cautionary tale about aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance, but it also became a case study in effective emergency response coordination. Universities started teaching the tunnel evacuation as an example of how dispatcher field communication should work. My protocols were adopted by other transit systems. Ravi's medical field coordination became part of paramedic training, and we became a story. The couple that met during disaster, that trusted each other in crisis, that proved that sometimes connection happens in the most unlikely circumstances. One night about a year after the collapse, we were lying in bed, now legally married, with a mortgage on a small house in West Philadelphia, and Ravi said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come down to the tunnel?" Every day, I admitted. There were decisions I made in that tunnel that could have gone wrong. Wrong turn in a secondary passage, and people could have gotten lost. Wrong assessment of structural integrity, and the tunnel could have collapsed further. But it didn't, I agreed. Because we worked together. Because you trusted me to know the tunnels, and I trusted you to know the medicine. We make a good team, Ravi said. We make a perfect team, I corrected. And he kissed me there in the dark, and I thought about all the ways a tunnel had saved us. How a disaster had forced us to trust each other completely. How infrastructure failure had created the conditions for love to exist. Sometimes the best stories don't start with once upon a time. Sometimes they start with a phone call at 0247 in the morning saying, "Tell me what I'm working with." Sometimes they start in darkness with someone asking you to guide them through a tunnel. Sometimes they start with a voice saying your name like it matters.